In this video, we're looking at a whole bunch of secrets, Easter eggs, and generally interesting details you probably didn't know about Witch Queen in Destiny 2. We did one of these for Beyond Light, which you guys really enjoyed, so for Witch Queen I put together another list, and some of these are behind the scenes development secrets stretching all the way back to 2013, and others are just super random details that are pretty easy to miss. But either way, you're going to learn something new from this video. Don't forget to like it if you enjoy, and let's jump into the first one. The swamp in the Throne World is actually based off one of the oldest locations originally intended for Destiny 1 called Old Chicago. A lot of you old school players will definitely remember the name, and Bungie had mentioned it quite a few times as a future location, but for some reason it was never added until now. Concepts from this can be seen all the way back from 2013 alongside places like Europa that finally made it into the game with Beyond Light. But players have been asking for Old Chicago for nearly a decade before Bungie finally added it as the terrain between Savathun's Fortress and the Pyramid. Finch, the new ghost character, might sound familiar to some of you, and that's because he is actually voiced by Ian James Corlett, who's actually the original English voice actor for none other than Goku from Dragon Ball Z. One of the most iconic animated characters ever, and not a crossover you would expect, but Destiny actually has quite a lot of them. Another example is Savathun's Worm, the parasite in Witch Queen, actually has the same voice actor as Variks, D. Bradley Baker, who also worked as Starhorse from the 30th anniversary pack, but also Daffy Duck and the Tasmanian Devil, and also Klaus from American Dad. So Destiny is full of very talented voice actors that do a ton of other work all over different media. Another design inspiration from the early Destiny days are actually the Moth People, which was supposed to be an entire race, but ended up becoming the Hive, and that's actually where Savathun's design comes from. Oryx's design was a mix of some kind of demon and a giant bat mixed with a hammerhead shark, and Savathun was based off of these moths, which of course is very deep in the Hive backstory. So much like the Tiger Man, we'll probably never see the entire race of Moth People, but Savathun is the closest thing we're going to get. The Leviathan is actually scaled accurately, and you can see its size difference between the Moon and Nessus, which is actually tiny. So the Leviathan was massive, taking up most of the skybox, whereas on the Moon, where it's currently stationed, it is tiny. Nessus is actually only around 60 kilometers across in real life, and it's basically just a tiny rock about the size of a big city just floating around Saturn. So fun fact, the areas on Nessus are probably most of the surface of Nessus, and we've basically explored all there is inside and out. So there probably won't be more locations on Nessus, and it's easily one of the smallest locations in Destiny. Now, sadly, there is no sign of the giant frog in the swamp. To many players' disappointment, yes, it's actually a real concept art from the early Destiny days that a lot of people have been demanding ever since. But while there's no giant frog, you can find some very, very weird alien creatures in the Throne World, such as the giant swamp flea. Bungie set out to create a series of very strange wildlife that you would find in an alien place such as this, and they definitely achieved their goal. If you look closely in the Lightblade Strike, you can also find some kind of weird sea monster lurking in the waters. It's very similar to the one found on Titan, and probably one of the weirdest ones is this big slug that pops out of the waters every now and again and hides if you get too close from it. You can see it through a sniper scope easily, but it's a very weird looking creature. So still no signs of the giant frog, but as Bungie said, a lot of weird aliens to be found here. Next up, did you know that Acer have a laptop called the Predator Helios 300 that can handle any game you throw at it without breaking the bank? There's no need to check if your games can run on it. It goes up to a 12th gen 14 core processor from Intel and the Nvidia RTX 3080 for a GPU. Then to be able to see those all important frames, it's got a 17-inch quad HD display with 165Hz refresh rate, which we all know is super important. It also comes with 1 month free of the Xbox Game Pass, which has got a massive list of games to play. One of my favorite things is the Predator Sense software. This lets you overclock the CPU and GPU for even more power, also control the Aeroblade fans to keep it cool and quiet, and of course customize the RGB keyboard lighting till your heart's content. So if you want to check out this portable powerhouse, you can find the Helios 300 linked in the description, and thanks to Acer for sponsoring the video. An early version of Savathun's Temple was actually set on Europa. This is a concept art from Beyond Light, and when they started working on Europa, which ended up of course being for the Fallen and Vex, you can see it looks similar to Scarlet's Keep, but it's way bigger and obviously released after Shadowkeep. So I remember covering this when it came out, how it looks very strange to see something that looked like it came from Shadowkeep on Europa, but turns out it was actually the early version of Witch Queen and Savathun's Temple. Witch Queen and Beyond Light would have been developed around similar times, so it makes sense the locations were moved and swapped a bit. Fun fact, all the characters in this cinematic were actually acted out by just one guy by himself in a room. Just like Beyond Light, Bungie devs made Witch Queen almost entirely from home, and they still hadn't returned to the Seattle studio yet, where a lot of the equipment and mocap studios would be used to film this sort of stuff, but this is one of the most important scenes in the whole expansion and was filmed by the same guy in a room full of brooms and vacuum cleaners he found as props to represent the other characters in the scene. Similarly, most of the emotes were actually performed by her and her dog nearby, so again, this is all pretty much done from home. So these two people are responsible for basically all the animations you see in Witch Queen between the emotes and the cutscene animations. There are some old concepts made by a Bungie artist in 2017 and 18 released in 2020, but some have speculated could be a super early concept for Rhulk, the Witch Queen raid boss. You can definitely see a lot of similarities, so it is possible, especially if you look at some of the old Rhulk concept arts, they kind of match up. But while these are cool, Bungie definitely went on to make Rhulk one of the most unique models we've ever seen in Destiny. In addition to those, there are even more weird concepts which definitely look like something you'd find on the Pyramid or on Savathun's Fortress. It's anyone's guess what expansion these were actually for, but they definitely do look a lot more Hive, Witch Queen and Darkness related than say Fallen or Cabal or Vex, but either way, it is always cool to see how outside the box some of these designs are and what the artists at Bungie can come up with. A very obscure detail you may not have noticed, especially if you're a new player, is that in Witch Queen they finally fixed the crater in the tower next to Eververse. So when the Almighty crashed nearly 2 years prior, it only just missed Eververse barely and left this huge crater here for exactly 2 years in the tower. It was basically a clever joke from Bungie at lots of people wanting them to get rid of Eververse and destroy the store. There was so much talk about that at the time, so as a clever joke, they decided to have it just barely miss the store to poke fun at people asking for them to remove Eververse, and it was the only damage to the entire tower. So this was Bungie's way of saying Eververse is going nowhere and Tess is here to stay. So considering it took 2 years for this crater to be fixed, the old tower should be repaired in about 200 years from now. The new glaive weapon type actually has a lot more story significance than you might think and isn't just a random melee weapon Bungie decided to add. It actually comes from Rhulk's personal weapon that he used to wipe out civilizations with. The backstory here is that Savathun trapped him in the pyramid and left a piece of the glaive as bait for us to find to then put into the artifact on Mars. It's actually the item that you have to go and collect in one of the early missions for Witch Queen, but Savathun did this so she could get her memories back, so she knew the Guardian's endless need for shiny loot would help her, and then we ended up turning that original piece into the Enigma, and her plan worked, and that is the reason we have glaives. Something very strange was that in Witch Queen, Bungie actually added an exotic shader for the first time ever in Destiny history. It was called Prismatic, and it was the first shader of the exotic rarity ever and could only be obtained in an Eververse bundle called the Alluring Looks bundle. This was publicly visible for anyone to see in the API, so it had a lot of people talking, but 2 months after Witch Queen in around April, the bundle and the shader was removed from the game files completely. So it is very interesting that Bungie were actually toying with the idea of an exotic shader, which is brand new for Destiny, like I said, never been done before. So it is likely they will add something like this at some point if they're considering it, but it also has everyone wondering, what does an exotic shader in Destiny even look like and what sort of animations and effects would it have, but also how much would it cost in that Eververse bundle, which probably wouldn't have gone down too well with the community. Another theory is that this shader ended up becoming the photo finish shader, which came at the end of Guardian Games this year, and this is definitely one of the most animated shaders we've ever seen, so it does seem sort of exotic, and they could have just changed their mind at last minute, but we almost got an exotic shader in Destiny for the first time ever, and we'll have to wait and see if Bungie decide to actually add one down the line at some point in the future. A super weird feature that had a lot of players puzzled at launch are the floating objects under the artifact on Mars. At first it did seem like it could be some sort of interactive puzzle or Easter egg to unlock something if you shoot them in a certain order, as they do take damage, but the fact you get given infinite ammo led a lot of people to think this could be some kind of secret to unlock, but nothing has been discovered so far, and it does seem to be just a simple shooting range, just a very scaled down version from the tribute hall on the old Leviathan. So at the very least, it is a decent way to test out your weapons that you craft upstairs, and especially for new players, it can be a very useful way to learn special or heavy weapons without worrying about ammo and kind of get the hang of them. If you've played the raid, you might have wondered why there is a giant bone in the middle of this room, which is full of some of the weirdest objects in Destiny, but the story of this bone actually comes from a giant sea creature and friend of the Traveler called the Leviathan on Oryx and Savathun's homeworld. Long before they were the Hive, the Witness actually sent Rhulk to corrupt the worms, and the Leviathan tried to stop Rhulk, who wasn't having any of it, and he ripped out one of its ribs, which is this bone you're seeing in this room as some sort of trophy. You can see in this concept art the level of detail they put into it and the pattern. The artist said the intention was to give a sense of history and culture to the space, which they definitely achieved, and some of the stuff in here is so unique. It's like an Alien's ancient trophy room. If you're still not satisfied and want to learn even more Witch Queen secrets, then this video on screen is the one for you. It's packed full of them. If you could like the video before you go, that would be much appreciated. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.